The draft class of 2018 was filled with talent top to bottom, some of which are looking to be transcendent and franchise-altering. These players have just likely wrapped up their first 2 full seasons in the NBA, with the regular season now likely finished for the year. So with that being the case, now is as good of a time as any to revisit the night they all got drafted. For today's video, similar to my last video, we will be looking at every draft pick made in the 2018 NBA Draft Lottery, and giving a grade to the selections by the teams relative to how good of a selection it has proven to be. Factors like the production of the player, the fit on the team, and the future outlook of the player will all play into the grade, but before we start things off, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as all support is very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. Starting things off with the first pick now, the Phoenix Suns drafted DeAndre Ayton. Ayton was a physical force at the University of Arizona before he declared, and his combination of pure strength and finesse made him someone that, at the time, analysts and fans alike saw as someone you couldn't pass up on. And now, through 2 seasons in the league, outside of a 25-game suspension, he's looked every bit on track to live up to that hype and become one of the most productive bigs in the league. He may not get the national attention a few other players in this class that will be mentioned later in this video receive, but that by no means discounts how good he's proven to be, having just averaged 19 points and 12 rebounds per game this year. He's weirdly forgotten about by many as a number 1 overall pick, but on the court, he's producing like a guy taken first, and because of that, I give this pick a grade of a solid A-. With the second pick in this draft, the Sacramento Kings selected Marvin Bagley, which is where things start to take more of a negative turn. Through 2 seasons, he's been a fine player, producing decently and showing some promising signs for future development, but for a variety of other reasons, this was just not that good of a pick. At the time, Luka Doncic was the player that pretty much everyone viewed as a top 2 prospect in this draft, alongside Ayton, so if Luka slipped past the first pick, everyone expected him to go number 2. So when the Kings passed up on him for Bagley, it was a questionable decision, and through 2 years now, it looks even more questionable with Luka dominating the league. Obviously, Bagley very well may become a very good player down the line, but the likelihood of him ever coming close to what Luka is slim. So because of that, this pick gets a subpar grade of a C-. Now, up next with the third pick, the Dallas Mavericks selected Luka Doncic, who we just briefly discussed. The Mavericks traded up with the Atlanta Hawks for this pick, and that move landed them a guy they will likely be building around for years to come. At just 20 years old, he's already established himself as a superstar, capable of creating for both himself and others at an elite level. This season, he averaged a massive 29 points, 9 rebounds, and 9 assists per game, while shooting a solid 46% from the field, which are numbers that very few people in the history of the league have ever been able to pull off. The Mavericks have quickly advanced past the rebuilding stage and are now ready to make runs in the playoffs, which is well ahead of schedule, and a lot of it comes down to Luka leading the way. When it comes to landing top quality players at the top of the draft, there's no better way to come out than with a player of this caliber, so the grade I'm giving this pick is without question the mighty A+. Up next, the fourth pick in the draft was made by the Memphis Grizzlies, and the player they chose was Jaren Jackson Jr. Jaren's versatility as a big man makes his value to the Grizzlies immense, yet it also simultaneously flies under the radar. On defense, he's an excellent rim protector that blocks shots and contests even more, and he can rotate out and hold his own against smaller matchups on the perimeter, but he does admittedly need to work on cutting down on his fouls. But for him to be where he is while also only being 20 years old is very exciting for Grizzlies fans. Plus, offensively, he plays the role of a stretch big perfectly for the modern NBA, and his scoring output has gone up from year 1 to year 2, while also now knocking down 40% of his threes on a high volume. Ja Morant, who the team would draft the next year, may be the face of the team now as the primary playmaker, but Jaren's value on both ends of the floor is equally as valuable. He does all the little things needed from a big, and as he gets more experience through the years, he very well could have all-star potential. I give this pick a very solid B+ for a team that drafted incredibly well during their rebuild. Next up with the 5th pick, the Atlanta Hawks drafted Trae Young with the pick that they swapped with the Mavericks. In the history of draft day trades, pretty much every one of them has a winner and a loser, but this swap made between the Hawks and the Mavericks might be the rare example of a win-win, because both teams got their franchise pillar to build around. Trae is an elite playmaker already in his 2nd season, averaging about 30 points and 9 assists per game. His crafty handle, ability to shake defenders and create space, and shooting ability from anywhere on the floor make him an incredibly difficult cover for opposing defenders, and when he catches fire, there's almost nothing you can do about it because he's pulling up from the logo. The Hawks may not have been winning much with him at the helm, but they are still in the middle of a rebuild, so when Trae and some of the other core players they've put together start to hit their primes, this will be a scary group, and finding a guy as productive as Trae with the 5th pick makes this grade for the pick another A+. Next up with the 6th pick in the draft, the Orlando Magic drafted Mo Bamba. On draft night, Bamba was one of the most mysterious prospects because his physical tools and ridiculous length and size combined with his shot blocking potential had scouts drooling over what his potential could be. The problem though was that as a player, he was still very raw, and outside of blocking shots, the rest of his game still has a long way to go before he can start to be a consistently productive player, let alone a high level one. Through 2 seasons, he's been a bench player that saw his minutes and overall production reduce from year 1 to year 2, and now concerns are starting to set in. This draft was stacked with talent across the board, and there were definitely other options the Magic could have chosen on draft night at the time, and now 2 years later, it looks like the pick might have been a mistake. Bamba is still obviously very young, and very well can still develop into the player that many thought he could be, but at the moment, it's looking a lot less likely than it did 2 years ago. As for the grade, I'm giving this one a hard D, because he's struggled, and the Magic probably would have been better off taking someone else. Up next with the 7th pick, the Chicago Bulls drafted Wendell Carter Jr. Carter, funny enough, actually probably would have been a better pick for the Magic last pick if they still wanted a big man, but the Bulls are definitely glad he fell to them. Carter has proven to be a solid post defender and rim protector, and his overall defense has been promising, but his offensive game is still a bit of a mystery. He's a very good post-up player, but the Bulls don't necessarily create many post-up opportunities, so most of his touches come in pick and rolls. He has a serviceable but not quite proficient jumper right now, so in a way, his offensive game is kind of being held back. He's a strong rebounder too, and across the board, his production is pretty good, but there's still so much room for growth. He's struggled with injuries in each of his first seasons too, so that could also be playing a part in his offensive game not growing much yet, but this was still a very good pick for the Bulls, and the grade I'll give it is a nice rounded out B. Next up with the 8th pick, the Cleveland Cavaliers drafted Collin Sexton. Sexton's career with the Cavs got out to a pretty rocky start after the veterans reportedly took some shots at his ability to play and it leaked to the media, but since then he's moved past it and proven to be a very solid player. As a guard, he's become someone that's very difficult to defend off the dribble, and his ability to score the basketball is much better than people give him credit for. In just his 2nd season now, he's already become a 20 points per game scorer, and he does so while shooting 47% from the field and 38% from 3. His numbers may be a bit inflated because of the fact that he's on one of the worst teams in the league, but ultimately, this pick by the Cavs was a good one, and for that, I give it a grade of a B+. Next, with the 9th pick, the New York Knicks drafted Kevin Knox, who has arguably been the biggest disappointment of the entire draft class. What's crazy is that things actually started out well for him, as he dominated the Summer League before his rookie season, but once the real season began, his struggles started and never really slowed down. His role from year 1 to year 2 also greatly diminished because on the court, he was statistically one of the worst players in the whole league. His prospect is based around his scoring ability as a forward, but in the pros, he struggled mightily to do so, and defensively, he's a mess. While he still is very young, the Knicks seem to be losing patience with him quickly. And because of all of this, I have to give this pick a grade of a hard F. Next, with the 10th pick, the Phoenix Suns traded up to select Mika Bridges. Bridges is a prototypical glue guy in the middle of a lineup that contributes to winning basketball on both ends in a bunch of different ways, but doesn't necessarily wow you by filling up the stat sheet. He's a 3-and-D player that knows his role and does everything that's asked of him, and on a nightly basis, he's usually defending the other team's best player. He'll be a good player in the league for many years, and for that, I'm giving this pick a grade of a solid B. Next up, with the 11th pick, the Los Angeles Clippers traded up and drafted Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and by doing so, landed arguably the biggest steal in the draft. The fact that they traded him to Oklahoma City just a year after the draft is besides the point, because they were able to acquire Paul George, but even still, landing someone as talented and promising as he is at this spot is incredible value. He has all of the makings of a dominant two-way guard who plays with a very smooth and under control way of attacking, while also picking the defense apart and getting to his spots. He's got a bright future ahead, and with that being said, this pick gets one of the highest grades in the video with a nice A. Next up, with the 12th pick, the Charlotte Hornets actually traded down from the Clippers' last pick and drafted Miles Bridges. Bridges is an interesting player to analyze because he has all of the physical gifts of quickness and elite athleticism, and every now and then he'll wow you with a highlight dunk, but he's not very consistent as a scorer and he struggles mightily on defense. I think he could become a good player one day, but I'm not quite as confident in that assertion as many were 2 years ago when he got drafted. He's not bad by any means, he's just decent, and the grade for this one is gonna be a B-. Next up, with the 13th pick, the Los Angeles Clippers drafted Jerome Robinson, who at the time felt like a reach, and so far, nothing has really changed in that regard. Robinson was a nice prospect, expected to go somewhere in the first round at the time, but I don't think any mock drafts had him going as high as the lottery, so when this happened, it surprised a lot of people, and now 2 years later, people are still scratching their heads. He's barely gotten playing time 2 years in, and he hasn't exactly been good when he has played. Not to be harsh, but this pick was just bad, and I have no choice but to give it an F grade. And finally, the last pick of the lottery was made by the Denver Nuggets, and with it, they drafted Michael Porter Jr. Porter Jr. was a guy seen by many as a future superstar in the league, but back problems plagued him for the last 2 years, which killed his draft stock, and after sitting out an entire season last year, he's been slowly getting back into the swing of the season, and on occasion, has looked like the player he was pre-injury. Obviously, the health will always be something worth monitoring, because back injuries are no joke, but if he can continue to build on the steps he's made this season moving forward, then the Nuggets got themselves a steal, and because of that, the grade they'll be receiving is a nice B+. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what grades for the picks you guys would give. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.